Kenichi is a solitary, middle-aged office worker trapped in the monotony of a dead-end desk job. On a seemingly ordinary workday, he overdoes it on his go-to-energy drink, leading to his collapse and loss of consciousness. This alarming health incident becomes the wake-up call he desperately needed to make a drastic change. He decides to quit his job and leave his old life behind, relocating to the countryside to embrace a dull, simple existence as a farmer, settling in an unattractive cabin. One quiet afternoon, as he's in the middle of preparing lunch, something completely unexpected occurs. He's abruptly transported to an expansive, unfamiliar forest, feeling bewildered and uneasy. Kenichi scans his surroundings, his heart racing when his eyes fall upon the skeleton of an ancient knight, its armor pierced by a sword still lodged in its chest. Overwhelmed and alarmed, Kenichi glances around, trying to process his predicament and wondering how he's ever going to get out of this bizarre situation. Then, remembering an anime he once watched where the protagonist used a status bar in a similar scenario, he decides to try the same thing. To his amazement, a glowing status screen appears, displaying all his current stats. This is the moment Kenichi realizes he's in another world. Kenichi quickly adapts to the system, learning how it works. He discovers it allows him to store and retrieve items effortlessly, a feature he finds incredibly useful. Moments later, hunger strikes. The system offers him the option to buy food and water, but it comes at a price he can't afford since he's broke. Frustrated, he wonders what to do next. Kenichi soon stumbles upon the system's trading feature, allowing him to exchange valuable items for supplies. However, he quickly realizes there's nothing in his immediate surroundings to offer for trade. His gaze shifts back to the knight's skeleton, and his eyes lock onto the sword lodged in its chest. With no other options, he decides to use the sword for a trade. The system accepts the weapon, granting him 2 cartons of milk and some bread in return. After satisfying his hunger, Kenichi uses the leftover trade points to buy a shovel. With it, he carefully buries the knight's remains, offering a prayer of gratitude for the meal and the sword that helped him survive. Next, he buys a bike and begins exploring the area, knowing he needs to find a settlement and earn money quickly. Kenichi spends the rest of the day gathering items and trades them in for food and utensils. As night falls, he prepares a curry meal, ready to finally enjoy it, when a pack of black forest foxes starts creeping toward him. Fear grips him as he scrambles for a solution. Searching through his system, the only thing he can find is a box of fireworks. He throws them at the foxes, but they don't work. Panicking, he keeps looking until he discovers a slingshot with unlimited ammo. He fires a few shots, successfully scaring off the foxes. Relieved but shaken, Kenichi jumps on his bike and gets the hell out of there as fast as he can. The next morning, Kenichi finds himself at the edge of the forest, mentally preparing to face whatever challenges this strange new world has in store. Determined to find a way out, he resumes exploring the area. Using his system, he decides to purchase a stepladder and a pair of binoculars. Climbing up with the ladder, he scans the horizon through the binoculars and spots the walls of a city in the distance. This sight fills him with a glimmer of hope, as he believes reaching the city might provide him with an opportunity to earn money and start figuring things out. With newfound determination, Kenichi pushes his way through the dense weeds, moving as quickly as he can toward the city. Along the way, Kenichi reaches a crossroad and narrowly avoids being hit by a speeding carriage. The carriage stops in front of him, belonging to a young, blonde-haired merchant named Fayu, who feels bad about the near accident. Noticing the heavy rain, Fayu offers Kenichi a ride to the city free of charge. Kenichi climbs into the carriage and notices another passenger inside. Fayu explains that she is just a traveling bard and fellow traveler. As they continue their journey, Fayu observes that Kenichi's attire and name are unusual. Curious, he asks Kenichi what brings him to the city of Dahlia. Suspecting that he's not a local, Kenichi brushes off the question, simply stating that he's heading there for business purposes. Before long, they reach the city gates. Kenichi lends Fayu a hand unloading boxes from the carriage, and in return, Fayu hands him a small pouch as payment for the ride. Curious, Kenichi opens the pouch and discovers it's filled with pepper. His expression turns serious as Fayu cautions him about openly carrying spices. Fayu explains that the Spice Syndicate holds a strict monopoly over spices, making it risky to possess them without proper connections. Despite the warning, Fayu offers to buy the pepper from Kenichi, but Kenichi insists on gifting it to him. Fayu, however, refuses, stating that as a merchant, he's happy to get things cheaply but won't take anything for free. After handing Kenichi 3 silver pieces in exchange for the pepper, Fayu climbs back onto his carriage and continues on his way. Kenichi looks at the silver coins in disbelief. Realizing how much they're worth in yen, he's shocked by their value and feels a newfound sense of fortune. With money in hand, his next priority is finding a place to sleep. He heads to an inn, where he meets the attendant, a woman named Azalea. She greets him and guides him to the service counter, explaining the available rooms and payment methods. After paying for a room, Azalea asks Kenichi to write his name in the guest register. It's at this moment that he realizes he doesn't know how to read or write in this world's language. Feeling embarrassed, Kenichi explains his predicament to Azalea. She listens carefully before offering a word of caution, pointing out that the Merchants Guild will never accept him as a registered merchant if he struggles with fundamental skills like reading and writing. Kenichi quickly clarifies that he's fully capable of reading, writing, and even performing mathematical calculations, but he admits he cannot do so in this nation's writing system. To verify his claim, Azalea decides to test him with a math question. To her surprise, Kenichi answers it effortlessly. Satisfied that he possesses the essential skills, she guides him through writing his name in the register. Afterward, Kenichi asks if she can teach him how to read and write in the nation's language, offering her some candy as a reward. Excited by the offer, Azalea immediately agrees. As they talk, Kenichi learns that the land he's in is the Kingdom of Kadon, a nation governed by a hierarchical system with nobles and a king. Kenichi spends most of the night with Azalea, discovering that the country's language isn't too different from his native Japanese. Lying on the bed with a faint blush, Azalea is impressed by how quickly Kenichi picks it up, confidently concluding that he'll do well as a merchant. While Azalea takes a moment to rest, Kenichi, feeling a bit bored, decides to sketch a portrait of her. When he shows her the drawing, she's astonished by how lifelike it appears, remembering all the kindness Kenichi has shown her so far. Azalea blushes deeply once more and gently pulls him onto the bed to thank him in her own way. Later that day, Kenichi goes downstairs to the guild center, where he meets the receptionist. She hands him a handwritten registration form to fill out. He's initially confused about why it's handwritten, but then realizes they haven't developed printing technology yet. After filling out his details, he returns the form to the receptionist, who validates it. However, she informs him that the guild registration fee is 1 silver piece, roughly 50,000 yen. The thought of this makes Kenichi sigh heavily because he knows he doesn't have money like that. He asks if he can pay in installments, and the receptionist agrees, giving him a sense of relief. She then hands him his guild card, a simple metal piece with a crystal embedded at its center. The following day, Kenichi heads to the market, conversing with various merchants to gather information on the prices of goods and explore potential profitable opportunities. Later, back at the inn, he decides to improve his living space by constructing a more comfortable bed. Azalea observes him from afar, impressed by his carpentry skills and the care he puts into his work. As she continues to watch Kenichi diligently working on his project, her attention is drawn to the sturdy and uniquely designed clothespins he's using. Curious, she approaches him and asks if she could buy a few, mentioning that the thin clothespins she typically uses tend to break easily. Her remark sparks an idea in Kenichi's mind, and he begins to realize that these clothespins might have the potential to become a profitable product. The following day, Kenichi decides to set up a stand at a local market to sell these clothespins. The stand next to his is run by a woman named Anama. Shortly after he opens for business, Anama comes over to buy a few clothespins from him. Kenichi seems surprised by her interest, but Anama casually tells him there's no rule against stand neighbors buying from each other. With this interaction, they exchange introductions and strike up an acquaintance. Kanisha's clothespin business quickly turns into a massive success. On his very first day, he attracts a constant flow of customers. Much to his excitement, Anama shares in his joy, thanking him for the boost in foot traffic, as the crowd drawn to his stand has also brought more customers her way. Later, Kanishi takes some time to review his earnings. To his amazement, he discovers he's made a profit equivalent to over 15,000 yen in just one day, a considerable sum by the local standards. This achievement solidifies his belief that selling clothespins alone could provide him with a steady and sustainable livelihood. Just as he finishes his calculations, another customer approaches his stand, a tall blonde man with a sword on his hip, giving off the impression of someone important. The man browses the stand and eventually asks if Kanishi has any knives suitable for battle. Kanishi shows him a finely crafted blade, which the man inspects closely. Though it's a pristine weapon, something about it doesn't feel right. It's too short for his needs. The blonde man asks if Kanishi has anything larger. Kanishi nods and presents him with a tall broadsword. The man is immediately impressed, marveling at the quality and craftsmanship of the blade. He's eager to purchase it and asks for the price. Kanishi quotes 1 gold piece, but the blonde man hesitates, clearly feeling the price is steep. Despite this, he finds the sword so beautiful that he can't let it go. Their conversation is suddenly interrupted when a purple-haired catgirl appears out of nowhere and licks Kanishi's face. Startled by the unexpected gesture, Kanishi stumbles backward and falls to the ground. Noticing his shocked reaction, the blonde man observes silently for a moment before realizing that Kanishi has likely never encountered beastfolk before. He calmly explains to Kanishi that beings like the catgirl are a normal part of this world. Moments later, more beastfolk arrive and apologize for their sister's impulsive behavior. One of them climbs onto Kanishi's stand, grabs the cloth draped over it, and enthusiastically announces their intent to buy it. Kanishi initially tells them the cloth isn't for sale, but reconsiders upon seeing an opportunity to make money. He decides to sell the cloth for 9 pieces of copper, including a discount of 1 copper piece. The beastfolk, however, don't have the exact amount. Kanishi assures them it's fine and calculates the change they're owed. The beastfolk look at him suspiciously, unsure if they can trust his math. Just as tensions rise, the blonde man speaks up, confirming that Kanishi's calculations are accurate. Satisfied, the beastfolk hand over the money, take their cloth, and leave. The beastfolk aren't known to be the brightest when it comes to calculations, so it makes sense. The blonde man, impressed by Kanishi's honesty and ingenuity, ultimately decides to purchase the sword after all. Elsewhere in the city, a maid who purchased Kanishi's clothespins shows them to her master, Primula. Intrigued, Margaret asks if they could be used in the mansion, pointing out how much easier they would make the maid's chores. Primula agrees enthusiastically, suggesting they purchase more the following day. Taking the idea further, she envisions selling the clothespins through her own company, recognizing them as a potential gold mine. Excited by the opportunity, she rushes off to seek her father's permission to move forward with the plan. That evening, Kanishi is taking a bath by the well, wishing he could have a warm bath, but those haven't been invented yet. He decides he's going to have to make one himself. Looking through the store, if there's anything he could use to make the hot bath, and he happens to find a barrel for sale and intends to fill it with water and put it over a fire so he can experience a hot bath again. If his idea works out, he thinks he might be able to make some profit from it. That aside, Kanishi has been benefiting a lot from his online store screen, but he has no idea how it actually works or how the packages even get to him in the first place. Honestly, it feels almost too good to be true, and Kanishi can't shake the worry that it might eventually demand his soul as payment. While his success with the clothespins has been encouraging, he finds himself pondering what new product he could develop to achieve similar results. However, no fresh ideas come to him. Frustrated, he gazes at the ceiling, his thoughts drifting to the bigger questions. For now, there's no point in dwelling on it, so Kanishi decides to call it a night and get some sleep. Meanwhile, deep within the forest, a young girl named Anemone is on the run. The following day, as Kanishi prepares his shop for the day, he decides to make some adjustments to his inventory. He adds some jewelry to his selection. While these aren't genuine gemstones of high value, they have an attractive appearance, which should help him turn a modest profit. At that moment, the maid from the previous day, Margaret, arrives, mentioning that she's there to purchase more clothespins from Kenichi. When he asks how many she needs, he's taken aback by her request for 100. However, since she has the money ready, he proceeds with the transaction. As Kenichi is packaging the clothespins for her, Margaret's attention shifts to the jewelry he has displayed. She inquires if they are made from real diamonds. Kenichi explains that the pieces are crafted from polished glass, but they still look quite appealing. Margaret then asks him to reserve one for her so she can return and purchase it later. The day continues as usual, but just as Kenichi is about to close up shop, the beast folk from the previous day return to his store. They appear quite serious, and Kenichi starts to worry that they might be there to rough him up. However, Miley steps in close to him and confidently tells the others that she can definitely smell spices on him. The rest of the beast folk start cheering and eagerly ask Kenichi to sell them some spices. Despite their enthusiasm, Kenichi hesitates. After hearing about the spice syndicate and not knowing how they operate or what they might do if they discover he's selling spices, he feels it's too risky. The beast folk continue to plead with him, hoping he'll make an exception, but the locals in the area step in, explaining that it's unreasonable to expect someone as new as Kenichi to jeopardize his business for them. Hearing this, the beast folk seem to understand and back down. Kenichi can't sell them any spices, but it technically won't be breaking any rules if he just shares a meal with them. So, he invites the group to come eat with him, but it's going to have to be out in the woods so he doesn't attract any negative attention. The beast folk are really happy to hear this. Later that night, they all meet Kenichi and Anama on the outskirts of town so they can begin cooking. Kenichi is about to begin cooking when Anama asks if she can help. He tells her to cut some of the veggies for him. However, when Anama takes a look at the veggies, she can't believe how vibrant and juicy they look. Kenichi explains that he got these from a foreign country and guarantees that they taste really good. While Kenichi and Anama are busy working on the vegetables, Miley and the other beast folk are down by the river, trying their hand at catching fish. Before long, they manage to catch a good amount. With all the ingredients ready, Kenichi starts preparing the fish, seasoning it with spices, and then tossing everything into a pot to cook. The result is a meal that the beast folk absolutely adore. They've never experienced flavors like this before and are incredibly grateful for the food. However, the delicious meal stirs up a strong craving for alcohol among them. Anama warns them to control themselves, reminding them that alcohol is quite expensive. But Kenichi doesn't see any harm in indulging them a little, so he pulls out a bottle of inexpensive booze and pours a few glasses for them. In return, he makes them promise that they'll never tell anyone about the meal he cooked for them. Anama warns Kenichi that he's being a little too generous, but he doesn't see anything wrong with letting the beast folk enjoy themselves, especially since they seem to be good people. That night, they drink together, bathe together, and eventually fall asleep under the stars. Miley seems to really like Kenichi now. The next morning, Kenichi returns to the inn, and Azalea is a bit upset since he was out all night. Kenichi tries to explain that he was just hanging out with a couple of beast folk outside town, but judging from the cat lady fur on his jacket, she thinks Kenichi did a lot more than just hang out, and she's mad he chose to do it with a cat lady instead of her. Later that day, as Kenichi is setting up his shop for another day of business, Margaret arrives with Primula to pay him a visit. Kenichi is momentarily captivated by Primula's beauty, but then he notices Margaret standing behind her and realizes they're probably here to buy the necklace Margaret had inquired about the day before. He retrieves the necklace, and Margaret pays for it before handing it over to Primula for inspection. Primula is so impressed by the craftsmanship that she finds it hard to believe the necklace isn't made of real diamonds. She then asks Kenichi if he has more necklaces like this in stock. In response, Kenichi retrieves several more pieces from his collection and brings them out for her to see. Primula is incredibly impressed by the quality of Kenichi's products, as well as the fact that he has an item box. She has a request to make of him. She tells him that she is the daughter of the owner of the Mallow Trading Company, and if if Kenichi is willing to accompany her, she would like to introduce him to her father. Kenichi likes the idea of meeting with the owner of a major trading company, but he is hesitant to meet any big shots since it might spell trouble for him. However, Anama tells him that Primula's father is well known around town, and everyone says he's a man of good character. So, Kenichi doesn't have to worry about getting into trouble with him. Since that's the case, Kenichi agrees to go with Primula, and she invites him to join her in her carriage so they can go meet her father. On the way, Primula shows Kenichi some replicas of the clothespins she had made. While the wooden part was simple enough for her craftsman to replicate, the metal clamp proved too intricate for them to recreate. Kenichi understands why they struggled since even he doesn't fully know how the springs are made, he just knows it's a complex process. Eventually, they arrive at Primula's home, and Kenichi is stunned by its enormous size. However, Primula casually mentions that, compared to the homes of other nobles in the area, hers is actually quite modest. They head inside, and Kenichi is introduced to Primula's father, Mallow. They both greet each other, and Mallow invites Kenichi to have a seat so they can begin their discussion. Once Kenichi is settled in, he shows Mallow some of the jewelry he has, and Mallow is just as impressed as Primula was. On top of that, Primula tells him that Kenichi possesses an item box, and Mallow finds this interesting because he also has one. His item box is what allowed him to build his trading company to this level in the first place, so if it's used properly, he thinks Kenichi could become quite successful. Although right now, Kenichi is just using it to store his supplies. The reason Mallow wanted to meet with Kenichi is to discuss the possibility of making Kenichi the official supplier for the Mallow company. Kenichi had anticipated a proposal like this and assumes Mallow's plan is to market the goods in a way that will maximize profits. However, Kenichi wonders why, if that's the goal, Mallow didn't just continue buying items from his shop at a low price and reselling them later. While Mallow could have done that, he explains it would be a dishonest business move, and if Kenichi ever discovered they were reselling his goods without permission, it would certainly upset him. Additionally, approaching Kenichi directly gives Mallow a strategic advantage over his competitors, who would likely try to strike a similar deal with him in the future. With that being said, Mallow would like to begin their partnership negotiations and offers to pay Kenichi 50% of the retail price for his goods. Kenichi could push for a better deal, but he's honestly okay with this since he's already making a ridiculous amount of profit from his online store. So, he accepts Mallow's offer and the two shake hands on it. He officially signs the supply contract, and the first few items he supplies Mallow with earn him over 1,000,000 yen worth of coins. However, when Primula sees all the beautiful jewels Kenichi has in stock, she falls in love with them and asks her father if she can just buy these ones from Kenichi for herself. Mallow sees no problem with that, so Primula offers to pay him 10 gold coins for them, which is equivalent to 2,000,000 yen. For the first time since he got here, Kenichi has an 8-figure bank balance. Since things are going so well for him, Kenichi decides it's time to start setting up his peaceful life and purchases a house from his store. The following day, he leaves the city walls and ventures into the forest to find a suitable spot for his new home. Before heading out, he mentioned his plan to Azalea so she wouldn't worry, though she found it odd that Kenichi would willingly choose to live in the dangerous forest instead of staying within the safety of the city. After finally finding a good location, Kenichi buys a weed whacker and begins clearing the area. However, he quickly encounters an issue. While most items from his store are reasonably priced, fuel is expensive no matter what world you're in, with no way around the high cost. Kenichi decides to just deal with it and continues working until he has successfully cleared a path for himself to move in and out of the forest. After that, he needs to start working on getting rid of all the trees. So, he buys a chainsaw and starts cutting. After several hours of hard work, Kenichi has finally managed to cut through a bunch of the trees in the area, so all that's left is to move them out of the way. However, when he tries to stuff the trees in his item box, it doesn't work. It looks like the trees are too long to fit, so he's going to have to bust out the chainsaw and cut them down into more manageable pieces. He eventually shortens the trees into 10-meter logs, and this way, he's able to fit them in his item box. So, he's almost done with the tree removal. The only thing left to do is pull out all the tree stumps, but that's going to be a lot of work, and the sun is already setting. So he decides to come back and finish up tomorrow. The next day, Kenichi heads back to the forest to continue working. But after spending some time digging at the stump, he realizes the task is far too demanding for a middle-aged man like himself. Rather than risk injuring his back, he decides to buy a bulldozer instead. However, as soon as he sees it, he's hit with the realization that he just spent 1.2 million yen on heavy machinery simply to avoid manual labor. He feels a bit of regret about the splurge, but at the same time, the thought of not having to strain himself makes him wonder if it was actually a smart investment. He starts up the bulldozer's engine, only to discover that it runs on diesel, and his store doesn't sell diesel at all. This throws him into a panic, as the thought of wasting so much money on something he can't even use is overwhelming. He thinks for a second and realizes he could probably make his own diesel if he mixes kerosene and some additives, but when he's about to try it out, he realizes he could destroy the bulldozer's engine if he gets the proportions of the mixture wrong. So, just to be safe, he decides to test out his mixture on a diesel generator first. After filling it up, he tries turning it on, and it seems to work fine, so he knows his homemade diesel will work with the bulldozer. He intends to return tomorrow to finish the job. In the meantime, he needs to do something about all the bugs out here, so the next day, he decides to head to a local magic shop to buy some bug-repellent magic stones. As Kenichi steps into the shop, the wizard who owns it greets him and asks where he's from. Noting that he hasn't seen him around before, Kenichi explains that he's a foreigner who recently opened a shop in town and has come by to purchase some bug-repellent stones. The wizard informs him that the stones cost 3 silver coins, which is quite pricey. Hoping to negotiate, Kenichi offers the wizard 2 oranges in exchange for lowering the price. Since the wizard has never seen oranges before, he assumes they must be a rare and exotic fruit and agrees to give Kenichi a discount because of the trade. Later that day, Kenichi has a conversation with Anama, who mentions that the wizard is incredibly knowledgeable and someone worth having as a friend, essentially the complete opposite of the wanted criminal Shaga, whose posters are displayed all over town. As the leader of a notorious bandit group, Shaga has a substantial bounty on his head. That very night, he orchestrates a raid on a carriage transporting slaves, leaving everyone wondering what he plans to do with them. The following day, Kenichi returns to the forest, eager to finally put his bulldozer to use. Any regrets about the purchase vanish as he realizes how much easier it's making his work, and it's surprisingly fun to operate. With this, nothing stands in the way of his dream of living a peaceful life in the woods. However, after spending so much on the bulldozer, his finances are nearly drained, forcing him to pause any further construction for the time being. A little while later, Kenichi meets up with Mallow and Primula again, hoping to sell them some salt and sugar for a decent profit. Mallow tries the sugar and is impressed by its quality, but unfortunately, he can't buy it from Kenichi. The state holds exclusive rights to the trade of sugar and salt, meaning Mallow would face serious trouble if he purchased it from an unlicensed source. On the upside, though, the jewels Kenichi sold to Mallow earlier are flying off the shelves, so Mallow is eager to buy more right away. The additional jewels Kenichi sells this time earn him 15 gold coins, equivalent to roughly 3 million yen. With this newfound wealth, Kenichi finally has enough money to buy the log cabin he spotted in his store. He's still amazed that the store even sells entire cabins, and for just 1.7 million yen, no less. It almost feels too good to be true. But Kenichi isn't about to pass up the opportunity, so he goes ahead and purchases the log cabin. Unfortunately, the cabin seems to have been sourced from Walmart, because as soon as Kenichi purchases it, he's buried under a mountain of wooden planks and a set of instructions that make no sense to him. He takes a moment to manually read through the instructions, and just as he feared, assembling the cabin is going to be an enormous headache. However, since he's already paid for it, he has no choice but to push through and get it done. As Kenichi starts working on the construction, the beast folk he helped earlier happen to pass by, and as a gesture of gratitude, they decide to lend him a hand with the build. Several weeks pass, and with the help of the beast folk, Kenichi manages to make consistent progress on building his log cabin while still running his stall. After just under a month of hard work, the cabin is finally finished. Kenichi knows he couldn't have completed it so quickly without the beast folk's assistance, so to show his gratitude, he throws a barbecue party for them. However, even though the cabin itself is done, Kenichi still has a long list of tasks to handle on his own, like painting the walls and roof and setting up electricity. It takes him another month to sort out all the essentials, but once everything is in place, Kenichi's home becomes completely self-sufficient. He builds a fence around his house and farm, and for electricity, he installs a couple of solar panels. With his dream home finally complete, the first thing Kenichi does to celebrate is enjoy a nice warm bath, though he still needs to figure out how to install indoor plumbing, as it took several bike trips to fill up the bath. The next morning, Kenichi heads to the inn to let Azalea know that he's finished building his forest cabin and won't be staying at the inn anymore. Azalea is a bit surprised, as she didn't think Kenichi was serious when he mentioned wanting to build a house in the forest. Still, she's happy for him and proud that he achieved one of his goals, even if it means she won't get to see him as often anymore. The following day, Kenichi wakes up in his cabin, and with the weather being so beautiful, he decides to head out and take photos of the local flowers. However, his peaceful outing is abruptly interrupted when an arrow whizzes past him, nearly hitting him. Startled, Kenichi tumbles off his bike, but the attack doesn't stop. More arrows are fired, forcing him to take cover behind a tree. The culprits turn out to be a group of new beast folk living in the forest. They explain that they were out hunting and instinctively attacked him, mistaking him for a threat. However, even after realizing that Kenichi is the human who built a cabin in the forest, they remain hostile and decide to kill him anyway. Kenichi has no idea why these beast folk are attacking him, but he's not about to sit back and let them do as they please. He reaches into his inventory, pulls out his slingshot, and fires back. The beast folk, caught off guard by the fact that the seemingly weak human is fighting back, start to second-guess their actions. When Kenichi escalates by throwing fireworks at them and pulling out his excavator, they decide they have no interest in sticking around to find out what it's capable of and quickly flee. Left puzzled by the whole ordeal, Kenichi suddenly hears a wounded animal crying out in pain near the base of a tree. The poor creature has been shot in the leg and likely won't survive much longer unless Kenichi acts fast. Kenichi cautiously approaches the injured cat, but it snarls at him, clearly not trusting his intentions. Not wanting to risk getting bitten, he spends a little money to buy some cushion armor as a precaution. However, as he starts removing the arrow, the cat barely resists. It seems to have run out of stamina. This makes it much easier for Kenichi to treat its injuries. He purchases a bottle of alcohol to disinfect the wound and then applies some antibiotic cream. While the immediate wounds have been treated, there's no guarantee the cat will survive if left out in the wild. So Kenichi decides to bring it back to his house. Kenichi sets up a blanket for the cat to rest on, but it still hasn't moved an inch since he treated it, which makes him start to worry. He hasn't seen any veterinarians in this town, but he figures there might be some kind of healing magic he can use, so he decides to consult the wizard. After listening to Kenichi's story, the wizard deduces that the animal he found is likely a bobcat. However, the wizard doesn't see the point in trying to heal it, suggesting that Kenichi could just kill it and sell its fur for a decent profit. Realizing the wizard isn't going to be of much help, Kenichi heads back outside. As he does so, Miley happens to be passing by, so she jumps on him and starts sniffing around. She smells the scent of a bobcat on him, and her people see bobcats as messengers of God, so she's really excited and wants to see it for herself. She follows Kenichi back to his house, and as soon as she sees the bobcat, she can already tell that its injury was caused by the dog beast folk, so she swears to make them pay. In the meantime, the bobcat seems to be doing a bit better, but it keeps trying to lick its wound, so Kenichi is forced to stick a cone on its head. Miley is impressed by Kenichi's skill in providing healthcare and asks if he's a doctor, but he modestly replies that he only knows some basic first aid. Wanting to thank him for saving the bobcat, Miley heads outside and does a bit of quick hunting, bringing back some bird meat as a gift. Kenichi grills it for their dinner, and after they eat, Miley, feeling exhausted, asks if she can stay the night. Kenichi questions whether it's okay for her to abandon her work to stay, but Miley insists that she's more concerned about the bobcat than her responsibilities at the moment. Kenichi agrees to let her stay, but since he only has one bed, Miley suggests they share it. Later that night, Miley somehow ends up on top of Kenichi. A few days later, the cat is looking much healthier, so Kenichi decides it's time to start working on his farm. While he can easily purchase the seedlings and tools he needs, the issue of water still poses a challenge. Running down to the river every time he needs to water his crops would be far too inconvenient. His first thought is to construct a well with a pump, but he decides to leave that task for another day since he's too exhausted to tackle it now. That night, he heads to bed, only to wake up the next morning to the bobcat jumping on his stomach. Although it's a bit painful, Kenichi is glad to see the bobcat so full of energy. Feeling confident in its recovery, he removes its cone and releases it back into the wild to live freely. Now back to that well matter. Kenichi decides to take a few days off from running his stall so he can get to work on it. He drills a hole in the ground and installs an electric pump, so he now has access to fresh water whenever he needs it. To celebrate, he starts filling up his bath so he can take a soak, but all of a sudden, he hears Primula call out to him. He's surprised to see her here, so Primula explains that he didn't open his shop today, so she got a little worried, and Miley told her about his log cabin, so she decided to visit him. She's impressed that Kenichi was able to build all of this on his own, but then she notices the giant excavator next to his house, so she asks him about it. Kenichi doesn't want to have to explain how that thing works, so he just says it's his summon familiar to keep it simple. Primula totally believes him, but now she thinks Kenichi can do magic, so he asks her to keep this a secret when she gets back home. At this time of day, the city gates are likely already closed, meaning Primula won't be able to return home. She's fully aware of that, which is why she plans to spend the night at Kenichi's place. Even when Kenichi points out that he only has one bed, she insists that it's not an issue. Noticing the barrel behind him, she asks what it's for, and Kenichi explains that it's a hot bath. Excited by the idea, Primula asks if she can try it out. By nightfall, Kenichi heats up the bath, and Primula eagerly gets in, enjoying the soothing warmth. However, being out in the middle of the woods starts to make her feel uneasy, so she calls out to Kenichi. He reassures her that he's sitting just on the other side of the wall, but Primula says she'd feel more comfortable if she could see him face to face. After finishing her bath, Kenichi hands Primula a bathrobe to change into. She falls in love with how warm and cozy it feels and immediately asks if she can buy it from him. Kenichi initially says it's not for sale, but after her persistent pleading, he agrees to sell her a couple of bathrobes. Later, he gives her a nightgown to wear for bed, and Primula is amazed by the variety of high-quality items Kenichi has in his possession. She confidently tells him that he could easily become the greatest merchant in the kingdom if he set his mind to it. However, Kenichi explains that he has no interest in such an ambition, as it would only attract unwanted attention from the local nobles and create unnecessary trouble. All he wants is to live a peaceful life and earn enough money to stay comfortable. Hearing this, Primula promises to do whatever she can to help him maintain his quiet, simple lifestyle. A little while later, they go to bed, but Kenichi doesn't want a repeat of what happened with Miley, so he decides to just buy a second bed for Primula for the night to avoid any funny business. Meanwhile, over in the outlaws' camp, Shaga seems to have received a job from someone really important, so this could spell trouble in the future. The next morning, Kenichi takes Primula back home, and while he's there, he decides to talk with Mallow about those bathrobes Primula asked about. Mallow is intrigued by the strange fabric, so he thinks it will sell really well. And since they are on the topic, Kenichi decides to bring up the possibility of selling something a little more spicy. Primula certainly seems interested, but Mallow shuts that idea down immediately. Just then, Margaret enters the room to deliver the ledgers Mallow had requested. Noticing Kenichi's curiosity, Mallow explains that he's in the middle of rewriting the old ledgers because the Empire recently introduced a brilliant new system for tracking sales, double-entry bookkeeping. Kenichi is stunned, as the double-entry system was a standard practice back in Japan. This reminds him of something Mallow had mentioned earlier about the Empire's rapid growth being driven by the inventions of a certain man. As it happens, Mallow was just about to test one of this man's latest inventions, which, to Kanisha's surprise, turns out to be a pitcher pump. This revelation only heightens Kanisha's suspicions, creating something as advanced as a pitcher pump would require prior knowledge, strongly suggesting that someone else from Japan may have been sent to this world. Kanishi feels slightly uneasy, realizing he might have competition. Over the next few days, Primula makes occasional visits to Kanishi and often spends the night at his place. However, tonight is different. She's leaving for a supply run tomorrow and won't be able to visit for a while. Before she leaves, she asks Kanishi if he still has that spicy nightgown because she'd like to buy it from him. Curious, Kanishi jokingly asks if she's trying to seduce someone, and to his surprise, Primula admits that the person she's after is him. Kanishi is caught off guard and doesn't know how to respond. He doesn't feel it's appropriate to have that kind of relationship with Primula, especially since he's friends with Mallow, and he doubts Mallow would approve of Primula pursuing an older man like him. However, Primula assures him that she already has her father's blessing, so that won't be an issue. Even so, Kanishi feels overwhelmed with everything going on in his life and tells Primula he isn't ready for a relationship right now, asking if she would be willing to put the conversation on hold. Primula agrees, but makes one request: she wants to share the same bed with Kanishi at least once before she leaves, even if it's just to sleep beside him. The next morning, Kanishi gets an unexpected visit from a knight, who turns out to be the same man he sold a sword to previously. His name is Norseball, and he explains that he was sent to investigate reports of a strange old man living in the woods. However, since he already knows Kanishi, he assures him that he can report back that there's nothing suspicious going on here. Before departing, Norseball shares some intriguing news. There's a mage in the Empire who invented a remarkable condiment called mayonnaise and somehow managed to defeat a dragon with it. Kanishi immediately suspects that this mysterious mage must also be someone from Japan. With the sheer accomplishments of this individual, Kanishi can't help but feel a bit outclassed. But it's not as if he's going to cross paths with this guy anytime soon, so the next month passes without any problems. One afternoon, while Kanishi is sitting at his stall, he suddenly remembers that Primula's supply run caravan should be arriving back soon, so he decides to visit her later that day. However, at that very moment, a loud commotion erupts in the town square, prompting him to get up and check out what's going on. It turns out that a caravan was ambushed by bandits, and everyone on board was taken captive, including Primula. In the streets, Mallow is desperately pleading with adventurers to help rescue his daughter. But since the bandit responsible is none other than the notorious outlaw Shaga, no one is willing to take the risk of facing him. Given the situation, it will take several days before the Knight's Order can organize a proper rescue mission. Meanwhile, Primula is thrown into a cage by Shaga and his gang. She remains unharmed for now, but only because Shaga intends to sell her to some depraved nobles for extra profit, with no real chance of escaping on her own. Her situation looks dire. Mallow understands that it's only a matter of time before Primula meets a tragic fate, so in his desperation, he turns to Kanishi and begs him for help. Kanishi isn't suited for combat in any way, but because he deeply cares about Primula, he ultimately decides to take action. However, he doesn't have enough funds to carry out his plan, so he tells Mallow that he'll need some money to make the necessary preparations. Without a second thought, Mallow hands over a bag of gold coins, willing to give Kanishi every last coin he owns if it means bringing Primula back safely. He informs Kanishi that Shaga's base of operations is located in the ruins, 50 kilometers west of Dahlia, which is quite a distance, meaning Kanishi will need to find a way to travel there. Looking through the vehicles available in his store, he ultimately decides to purchase a truck. But before doing so, he warns everyone that he's about to use summoning magic and advises them to step back. Then, putting on an act, he performs a ridiculous chant to convince everyone that what he's doing is real magic. Once his truck materializes, he climbs on top and calls out, asking if anyone is willing to join him in the fight. Shaga has a massive bounty on his head, so if they succeed in taking him down, there will be a huge reward for everyone involved. However, despite how tempting that sounds, grounds. No one steps forward to accept Kanishi's offer, as Shaga is simply too dangerous. Kanishi begins to worry that he might have to handle this on his own. But just then, the bobcat he rescued last month approaches him. Even though he can't understand its language, he can tell that the bobcat is trying to say that it wants to help. Speaking of cats, Miley and the other beast folk also step forward, eager to help Kanishi since they still owe him a favor for everything he's done for them. Seeing that he has allies willing to fight alongside him, Kanishi is relieved and immediately starts preparing them for battle. He buys a compound bow for Miley, while her brothers receive an axe and some swords. Just then, he hears another voice offering to help, and when he looks down, he sees Norseball standing there. Kanishi feels much more confident, knowing that an experienced knight will be joining them, though he can't help but wonder why Norseball just happened to be strolling through town in full armor. Norseball explains that he recently had a new sword forged using the steel Kanishi provided him, and he's been looking for an opportunity to put it to the test all day. Taking down some bandits seems like the perfect chance to do just that. One more person steps forward, expressing their desire to join, but to Kanishi's surprise, it turns out to be the magic shop owner. Kanishi immediately tries to dissuade him, insisting that it's too dangerous for someone his age. However, the old man reveals that he was once a mage in his younger days, and despite his age, his fire spells are just as deadly as they were in his prime. Realizing that having a powerful mage on their side would be a huge advantage, Kanishi decides to let him come along. But then, Anama insists that she wants to come along as well. Kanishi tries to convince her to stay behind, pointing out that she wouldn't be able to contribute anything in a fight. However, despite not being a fighter, she argues that she can still offer moral support and cook meals for the group. She also reassures him that the moment a fight breaks out, she'll run away, so he won't have to worry about protecting her. In the end, Kanishi agrees to let Anama join for moral support, but he immediately refuses when Mallow expresses his desire to come too. He firmly tells him to stay put and wait for Primula's safe return. Kanishi once again asks if anyone else is willing to join them, but the rest of the people are too afraid to face Shaga. One by one, they step back, and before long, the crowd disperses. It seems that the 9 of them will have to take on this challenge alone. Before setting out, Kanishi makes a stop at the guild, where he officially registers as an adventurer and formally submits a notice stating that he is pursuing Shaga's bounty. The group then sets out in Kanishi's truck, but as they leave the city, all the people who were too scared to fight begin mocking him because they think Kanishi is just going to run off with the money Mallow gave him. Meanwhile, deep within the ruins, Primula's cell is unlocked so the girl Shaga captured as a slave can bring her some food. However, Primula quickly realizes that the girl is starving, so she offers her the bread instead. Grateful for Primula's kindness, the girl immediately starts eating. As she does, Primula takes the opportunity to ask her a few questions. She finds out that the girl is being held captive here as well, so she asks if she wants to escape with her. The girl would love to get out of here, but she doesn't think it's possible given the current circumstances. However, Primula is sure that it's only a matter of time before help comes for them. After approaching the base, Kanishi and the others decide to take a short break. Once they finish eating, Kanishi gathers everyone together to start their strategy meeting. He lays out a simple assault plan, and the group agrees that it's a solid approach. With the plan set, they all move into position, and Miley is sent ahead to scout the area. Kanishi stays in contact with her using the radios he bought, but to keep things simple, when Miley asks about them, he just tells her they're magical devices that let them communicate over long distances. With Miley now in position as their scout, Kanishi and the others climb into the truck and prepare to set off, leaving Anama behind for her own safety. Since there's no certainty that they'll come out victorious, Kanishi instructs Anama to contact the Adventurers Guild if they don't return within a day. Late into the night, Kanishi checks in with Miley for an update on the bandits, and from her observations, it looks like they're in the middle of a celebration. In fact, most of them are already drunk, making this the perfect opportunity to strike. Just before they move in, one of the beast folk catches Kanishi's attention and hands him a nut. Confused, Kenishi asks what it's for, and the Beastman explains that it's a nut meant to help distract him from the reality that he's about to take lives. Apparently, that was good enough for Kenishi, so he takes a bite of the nut and he is instantly sent on the most intense trip of his life. Kenishi hardly knows what's going on anymore, but he remembers he has a mission to do, so he gets behind the wheel and starts driving like a maniac through the forest. Over at the bandits' camp, the celebrations are still in full swing. Suddenly, as two of the bandits notice the truck approaching, Miley takes them out with precise shots to the head. With that done, the next obstacle is the castle gate. To handle it, the old man climbs onto the truck's roof and casts an explosion spell, blasting a hole straight through. At this point, the entire bandit camp is on high alert, but it's already too late. Kenishi and the others have made it inside. Because the bandits had been drinking heavily beforehand, they're all intoxicated and unarmored, making them easy targets. Miley and her brothers swiftly take down the first few who get within range. Meanwhile, Norseball steps out of the truck, eager to christen his new sword with the blood of his enemies. Kenishi is so impressed by Norseball's strength that he gets distracted, and a bandit tries to use the opportunity to stab him in the back. But luckily, the Bobcat steps in to save him just in time. More bandits begin emerging from the ruins, so Kenishi decides to pull out the big guns and summons his bulldozer to squish them. The beast folk continue to take down as many bandits as they can, while Norseball is busy flaunting his superiority over them. Meanwhile, Kenishi is wreaking havoc with his bulldozer, sending the bandits into a panic. In the chaos, he accidentally crashes through one of the walls, revealing a large group of the bandits' prisoners inside, hoping to find Primula among them. He quickly scans the area, but to his horror, it turns out that Shaga had foreseen their rescue attempt. He's holding Primula hostage at the top of a tower. Primula is relieved that Kenishi actually came to rescue her, but Shaga is mortified because all his men have been wiped out. He assumed that a party would be sent to rescue Primula eventually, but he never could have imagined that they would be this strong. However, even with the current situation, Shaga still thinks he has the upper hand. He orders Kenishi and the others to drop their weapons immediately if they don't want him to stab her on the spot. Everyone hesitates, unwilling to make a move that could put Primula in danger, but Kenishi has no intention of letting Shaga get away. While Shaga is distracted, Kenishi discreetly buys a laser pointer and signals Miley, instructing her to take the shot as soon as he gives the command. Miley understands the signal, so Kenishi directs the laser pointer at Shaga's eye to momentarily blind him. The instant Shaga releases Primula in pain, Miley fires a shot, hitting him right in the shoulder. Wasting no time, Kenishi rushes up the stairs to get Primula to safety, but as Shaga regains his vision, he prepares to launch an attack on the two of them. Luckily, before he can do anything, the slave girl uses some kind of magic to knock him down the stairs, and once he hits the ground, he is perfectly lined up for Miley to give him a headshot. With that, the group emerges victorious, and Primula is finally safe. Their first move is to send Nyanji back to inform Anami of the good news. After that, Kenishi stores his vehicles away and purchases clothes for all the prisoners they manage to rescue. As everyone takes the time to clean themselves up, he notices the little girl and asks Primula to help wash her. While she's at it, he also hands her a pair of scissors so she can trim the girl's hair. Primula glances at the scissors and instantly asks Kenishi if he can sell her more, pointing out that they would be a highly popular item. However, before she can continue, the other women quickly remind her that she's completely naked, causing her to step back in embarrassment. Once everyone is dressed, Kenishi approaches the little girl and introduces himself. She tells him her name is Anemone and reveals that she has an important letter to deliver. The letter exposes the noble who has been funding Shaga's kidnappings, and upon hearing this, Norseball vows to ensure that the noble is brought to justice for his crimes. With that, the incident is finally resolved, and it seems they'll be able to return to Dahlia without any trouble. But before that, exhaustion catches up with everyone, and they all settle in for the night to get some much needed rest. As the morning arrives, Kenichi drives everyone back to town, where the townspeople eagerly wait, curious to see if he has managed to accomplish his mission. As his truck rolls into town square, Primula quickly hops out and rushes into her father's embrace, overjoyed to see him again. While they share their heartfelt reunion, Mallow's attention is drawn to the dress Primula is wearing, noticing its impressive quality. With pride, she informs him that it was Kenichi who gifted it to her. In that moment, both of them come to the same realization. Speaking of Kenichi, Mallow still hasn't had the chance to properly thank him, so he approaches him and sincerely expresses his gratitude for helping bring his daughter back. While he's at it, Mallow also asks whether Kenichi was able to recover all the stolen goods from Shaga and his crew. In response, Kenichi explains that he stored everything in his item box, but the contents aren't quite what one might expect. What Kenichi actually has in his item box is a collection of heads. Back in the ruins, before Kenichi and the others made their way back to town, the beast folk informed him that he would have to take the heads of all the bandits. Shaga and his gang are quite well known, which means there's a hefty bounty on them. However, to claim the reward, Kenichi must provide Shaga's head as proof of his death. But since all those heads will start to stink before long, it would be far more convenient if Kenichi could store them inside his item box. This is without a doubt one of the more unsettling tasks Kenichi has had to handle, but he doesn't have much of a choice, so he begins placing the heads into his item box. While doing so, he also gathers up everything the bandits had stolen, including a sack filled with 100 gold coins and several valuable items. On top of that, he ends up taking all the women who had been held captive by Shaga, though he's unsure about what to do with them. Before returning to town, he asked them if they wanted him to take them back to their villages. Some agreed, wanting to go home, but for others, their situation was different when they were captured. Shaga had burned their homes and slaughtered their families, leaving them with nowhere to return to. Understanding their predicament, Kenichi offered to take all of them back to Dahlia with him, as they would have a better chance at rebuilding their lives there. The women seemed absolutely delighted by the idea. Kenichi then looks over at Anemone and asks if she knows where her hometown is. She tells him that her village is called Europe, but it's pretty far from here, about 800 kilometers away, so getting her back there would be a long and difficult journey. Still, Kenichi is willing to make it happen if that's what she wants. However, Anemone has no desire to return to that village, as her own people had sold her into slavery. In that case, Kenichi asks her if she would like to come with him to Dahlia, and Ain immediately agrees. Kenichi then spends a while driving the women to their various destinations, and once that's done, he heads to the guild with the others to claim the bounty. The guild receptionist panics the moment a severed head is placed in front of her, but that's just the beginning. There are 50 more to go. So, Kenichi starts pulling them out of his storage one by one. With all these heads to inspect, the guild staff have a long and tedious task ahead of them. Meanwhile, Kenichi steps aside to take a break while they handle the work. The wizard approaches Kenichi and warns him that with his unusual summoning magic and exceptionally large item box, things could get really complicated if the nobles ever find out about him. But that's all the more reason for Kenichi to make sure he keeps a low profile. Speaking of nobles, Norseball walks up to Kenichi and tells him he's going to go meet with the local Count Asclepius to inform him of the corrupt nobles that were secretly backing Shaga's crime operation. So, he's going to be leaving now. Later that night, the guild finally completes the process of calculating the reward, which amounts to a total of 861 gold coins. Kenichi, wanting to be fair, suggests dividing it equally among everyone. However, Anama insists that she doesn't deserve a portion, as she didn't contribute during the mission. Since her life was never at risk, she feels it wouldn't be right for her to accept a reward. That said, she does have a small request for Kenichi. She asks if he would allow her to take care of Ain as if she were her own, as the girl reminds her of her daughter. Kenichi has no reason to refuse her request, confident that Anama will look after Ain well, so he entrusts her with the child and heads out into town. Now, while there's no doubt that Anama had the best intentions intentions when offering to care for Ain. It only takes a few minutes before Ain disappeared from her side. Meanwhile, since it's already too late to make his way back into the forest, Kenichi decides to spend the night at Azalea's inn. Before heading inside, he sets out some food for the bobcat, thanking it for keeping him safe during their mission. The moment he steps inside, Azalea immediately lights up with excitement, overjoyed to see him again after such a long time. Azalea had heard rumors about Kenichi defeating a large group of bandits, so she eagerly asks if it's true. However, Kenichi quickly denies it, not wanting to attract unnecessary attention. Setting that aside, she then reminds him of the supposed promise he made to take her as his lover once his business becomes successful. But Kenichi insists he never made such a promise and, more importantly, asks if there are any rooms available for him to stay in. In response, Azalea tells him that his usual room is still open. Kenichi makes his way upstairs and quickly falls asleep, completely drained from the day's events. However, later that night, he senses someone slipping under the covers with him. He already knows exactly what Azalea is after, but he groggily tells her that he's far too exhausted for that kind of activity right now. Despite this, Azalea refuses to give up, insisting that she doesn't get to see him very often. She climbs on top of him, and just as things are about to escalate, the two suddenly realize that a child and the bobcat are standing there, silently watching them. That completely ruined the mood. In the end, Azalea returned to her room, while Ain ended up spending the night in Kenichi's room. Figuring that Anama must be extremely worried about Ain, Kenichi went over to her shop to check if she was there, but he didn't see any sign of her. With nothing else to do about it for now, he decided to focus on finishing the rest of his duties for the day. Kenichi still has a lot of loot from Shaga's camp, so first, he heads to the weapon store to sell the swords and shields he got. He then sells the rest of the valuables to Mallow's company for 35 gold coins and takes the furniture to the old man's shop for 22 gold coins. Since the loot is going to be shared evenly, they all end up getting 12 gold coins from it. With his errands finally taken care of, Kenichi decides it's time to head back home. Upon arriving, Ain is stunned by how beautiful the place looks, but to her surprise, she finds Anama already waiting inside. Anama had been worried sick about Ain, but she trusted that Kenichi would eventually find her and bring her here, so she decided to wait. However, Ain unexpectedly declares that she wants to live with Kenichi instead of Anama. Anama doesn't understand why she suddenly wants to stay with Kenichi, so she tries to convince Ain that it would be better to live with her. But Ain has already made up her mind. Anama doesn't want to force her, so she just tells Ain that she's always welcome to visit her whenever she wants. Anama then heads back to town, and Kenichi turns to return home with Ain. On the way back, Kenichi asks Ain why she wants to live with him in the first place. However, there's no deep or philosophical reason behind it. She simply thinks Kenichi makes really delicious food, so she likes him more. After that, the two take a bath together before settling into bed. This new arrangement will definitely take some getting used to. But then again, considering Ain's age, it wouldn't be all that unusual for him to have a daughter. Kenichi eventually falls asleep, but as he rests, several cloaked men begin observing his house. Luckily, the suspicious people don't do anything for now, so life goes on as it normally would for Kenichi. 2 weeks pass, and due to Norseball's contributions in the battle against Shaga, he is awarded the title of Baron, granted some land, and, according to rumors, is now searching for a wife. Meanwhile, some time ago, Kenichi had shown Mallow and Primula a design for a bicycle, but they initially laughed in his face, thinking it looked too ridiculous to ever be profitable. However, it didn't take long for them to come to their senses and realize just how useful bicycles actually are. They apologized to Kenichi for laughing at him earlier and even offered to pay him 5 gold coins for the idea. Now, bicycles are fairly common in the country, and Kenichi is glad that his idea made such an impact. But he's still feeling a bit uneasy because he can't shake the feeling that someone is watching him. He ignores the feeling for now and heads to the guild so he can receive the final payout for the reward. Once he receives his money, Kenichi distributes everyone's share. Even though Anama had insisted she didn't want any, he still gives her a small portion. She doesn't believe she deserves it, but ultimately, she decides to accept his kindness and, in return, hands Ain an apple. Everything appears to be going smoothly, but then, out Out of nowhere, Kenichi gets that unsettling feeling again someone is watching him. And this time, he's sure he's not imagining things because he sees the person that's spying on him. This could be bad, so he takes Ain's hand and tries to get out of the area, but he soon realizes he is being followed by more cloaked people. He's backed into a corner, so his only option is to run into the alleyway to get away. However, at the end of the alley, he finds himself blocked in by a carriage. The cloaked men finally catch up to him, informing him that their boss wants to meet him alive. They assure him that if he cooperates, there will be no need for violence. With few options at his disposal, Kenichi pretends to go along with their demands. However, just as they're about to load him into the carriage, he quickly pulls some firecrackers from his inventory and hurls them at the cloaked men and inside the carriage. This provides enough of a distraction for him and Ain to crawl under the carriage, and now that he has created some distance, he pulls out a crossbow and points it at the men. He threatens to shoot them if they don't leave him alone, and since the kidnappers don't have any long-range weapons of their own, they are forced to flee. Kenichi lets out a sigh of relief, glad that he managed to escape. Moments later, Mallow arrives in his carriage. Having heard the commotion, he offers Kenichi and Ain a ride, and as they travel together, Kenichi explains everything that just happened. He suspects that this was the work of a noble affiliated with the anti-monarchy faction. Mallow recommends that Kenichi meet with the local lord, Asclepius, to secure some protection, while Kenichi agrees that it might not be a bad idea. He hesitates, worried that Asclepius could end up demanding that he start paying taxes, and he absolutely hates taxes. In the end, he figures it might be a better option to simply leave the city altogether. After returning home, Mallow tells Primula about Kenichi's decision to leave town, and Primula is upset because they haven't even gotten to properly thank Kenichi for everything he did for them. The bicycles were such a popular item that the local lord granted them a family name because of it, and as such, they owe Kenichi a great debt, so they can't allow him to leave until that debt has been fully repaid. Because of this, Primula has made up her mind to leave town with him and spend as much time with Kenichi as she can. She had already attempted to win his affection once before, only to be rejected. However, when she was kidnapped, Kenichi didn't hesitate for even a moment to risk his life to rescue her. So, Primula is convinced that Kenichi must care about her deeply, and if that's the case, then he'll surely wait to see her before leaving town. However, it turns out she may have overestimated his feelings because he's already gone, and not just him, but his entire house as well. Meanwhile, Kenichi is cruising along on his new motorcycle, and he must be pretty confident in his riding skills because he only bought a helmet for Ain, not for himself. As he rides, he happens to spot a familiar carriage and knows who it belongs to, so he pulls up beside Fayu and greets him. It's been quite some time since Kenichi last saw Fayu, so they take a moment to catch up. During their conversation, Fayu learns that Kenichi did, in fact, become a merchant. He also discovers that Kenichi was the one who came up with the bicycle invention, now has a daughter, and is currently on the road. Naturally, this makes him curious about where they're headed next. Kenichi explains that he and his new family are traveling, though he isn't entirely sure where their journey will take them. Fayu wishes them luck, and with that, Kenichi and the others jumps back onto the motorcycle and speed up riding off into the distance. Watch this next video on screen and subscribe to not miss next part.